we have seen the trend of large language models getting smaller and smaller, right? So mini language models, small language models, mini, micro, and so on. Now we're getting to a stage where some of those things will start are already available on smaller devices, right? So when you go into the smaller devices, large language models, it's also combining with another passion of mine, which is agents, right? So LLM is sort of now coming up with LLM based agents. So you have multiple of those in different architectures, can talk to each other and so on. That to me is again an extension of what we used to do in agent based modeling long time back, right? So in the 80s 90s, and that's still been evolving. Now agents, I think we are almost coming to the what I call as agent 4.0. The first generation of agents was sort of simple agent based modeling to look at very simple behaviors. Then during the 2000s, it also became digital twins, where you could connect not only the digital with the physical, but then for the physical to the digital was the first era. The second era was, hey, you can the digital can also start influencing the physical, right? So that's how the digital twin came about.
Correct.
And then now, of course, it is the LLM based agents. This is sort of the third era. Now, you combine all of them, you get a very powerful set of agents which can do reasoning of sensory information, perceptual information, of cognitive information at the edge.
Hi, friends, and welcome to this exciting episode of Leading with Data. Today, I have with me Mr. Anand Rao, and he brings an immense experience of more than 35 years in AI as a field. And he has played several roles. He has been an educator, he has been advisor to multiple startups, he has spent more than 20 years in industry. So, really brings in a lot of experience, perspective with him. Currently, he is also a distinguished service professor of applied data science and artificial intelligence at Carnegie Mellon University. So, Anand, thanks a lot for taking time out from your schedule and looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, no, great to be here. Thanks very much for inviting me to this
Great.
podcast.
So, Anand, I would want to start with how your career started. So, you did your masters from BITS Pilani, and then also your PhD in AI back in I think late 80s from University of Sydney. So for you personally, what was that moment when you decided that you wanted to explore AI, go in AI, and then what were some of the early years like for you?
Yeah, so as you can imagine, 80s were, I think, the very much the early years. I would say early years for computer science, in fact, and less about AI at that time in India. So obviously, grew up in India, and I was sort of very keen on doing computer science. And interestingly, there were only two undergraduate graduate schools at that time teaching
Wow.
computer science. So BITS Pilani
Mhm,
was one, IIT Kanpur was the second one, and I went into
mhm.
BITS Pilani, did my master's there, and then like every Indian in one of these schools always want to do higher studies, and I was looking for the leading edge. Read some things during my stay at BITS Pilani. So we were working very much in the early days with Professor Aditya P. Mathur. We were working on getting Indian languages on screens, and it may be hard to
Wow.
imagine now, but in the 1986, 87, you had only English on the screen. So you, again, screens were just coming up, right? So even then it was only
Correct.
English. So we worked, or rather Professor Mathur worked, and I worked with him as a young student. And that sort of kindled my interest in doing more research. And that's how I started applying to every place, so usually US and Australia. Interestingly, I was one of those early batches, I would say, unique batch, which was 4.5 years of engineering. So the previous years were 5 years, and the next batch was 4 years. and Bits Pilani decided not to graduate two batches at the same time. So we ended up graduating in December of 1984. That
Mhm.
was that sort of that quirk essentially led me to Australia, because the Australian term starts in January. They thought I don't want to be sitting around or working for 6 months. I should just apply to Australia as well. And I got a scholarship and I went to University of Sydney, again based on some of the work that they were doing at that time, which I read in some journals at that time. So that's how I landed in Sydney. It was a full scholarship, and there was also another attraction as an Indian to just go there, maybe with the full fellowship and decide what to do. And again, US is always there. I thought I could go back to US later on, and fell in love with Sydney, and then stayed there for 3.5 years, 4 years in Sydney, and then subsequently almost a decade in Melbourne. So that's how my journey started. In the late 80s, there was very little of AI as such that people were talking about in India, but AI was around, and it was also the upswing of one of the AI spring and summer before again it
Mhm.
went down. So it was a right time for
Yeah,
getting into.
in fact, that would lead me to the next question, right? So, over this period, you've seen obviously many winters and then springs, and a lot of attention getting garnered, and then also periods where things seem to have plateaued off, right? So what has been your kind of journey during this period, and then what is your perspective after seeing this for such a long time in terms of what to expect, let's say, going forward in some sense.
A good question. So I think I've been on the roller coaster ride with the AI. Sometimes with the AI, and sometimes without the
Mhm.
AI. So as I said, I was in the upswing of AI when and Japan had the fifth generation computing as a biggest initiative. At that those days, it was more Japan, and now Japan is going to take over the world, as we are talking about China or even India taking over the world, right? So those days it was Japan. I rode the wave. So after finishing my PhD, went into a company called the Australian Artificial Intelligence Institute. It was a
Mhm.
one-third owned by SRI International, which used to be known as Stanford Research Institute, but they're basically set up as an industry R&D by the Stanford University. Because we are one-third owned by them, got to do some very interesting projects for NASA, for DARPA through SRI. SRI is also a great AI place. A number of things came from there, and of course Stanford University and SRI. So got to work with a number of those people during the 90s. So very focused on. I would say my interest was not just in the theoretical AI. Of course, there's a quest for understanding, problem solving, reasoning, intelligence, but also given the work that I was doing with NASA and DARPA and defense, Australian defense as well, it was also very much around the applied and the engineering side. So it's interesting that AI has always been led by engineering, but also covered by the science part of it, right? So
Yeah.
engineering goes and defines certain things, and then actually shows how things work or don't work, and then the theoreticians and others sort of come in to provide a theory behind. So in that sense, I was really working on building these systems. At the same time, I was also working on some of the theory behind it and the math behind this over a decade or so. And then to your question around the ups and downs, AI started going down, and my interests also changed as I moved more into the business world. And I did my MBA from Melbourne Business School. I was in Melbourne at that time, did my MBA from Melbourne Business School. And like again, any MBA student, as soon as you finish MBA, you either go into the investment banking side or you go into consulting side. So I
Consulting.
decided to
Yeah.
go into the consulting side. And so at that time, I pretty much left AI. So AI was in its sort of downward trend at that time.
Mhm.
And there was in the early 90s, there was this deep learning versus it was called connectionism. And there
Yeah.
was also the more logical reasoning, common sense reasoning, knowledge representation. I would sort of belong more to the notion of rational agents, is the work that I
Interesting.
was doing. So again, there's always been a tension between the deep learning side and the more the symbolic reasoning side.
Symbolic reasoning. Yeah.
So sort of more on the symbolic camp, but of course, sort of reading what was happening. So around 97, 98, I call myself a deserter of AI. So I deserted AI when it was down, and then went into the management side. So when I went into the management side, I went totally away from technology. So rather than doing technology consulting, technology strategy, I focused much more on corporate strategy and business strategy, customer experience, and so on for almost a decade. Spent some time in London, working to a number of companies. So got very deeply into financial services, retail companies, telecommunications companies. So that was a time when 3G was coming up, right? So people are moving
Right.
from 2G to 3G, mobile phones era, and so on, and also a lot of regulations coming through the banking through Basel. So was involved in some number of interesting projects there. Then moved to Boston around 2005, six, with a company that was acquired by PwC later on. And so when AI started coming back around 2007, 8, some of the work that was happening in deep learning essentially brought AI more to the limelight. So again, you started seeing the rise of AI. This time around, I was more in a consulting organization, so I was sort of able to take everything that I was doing to the businesses, but applying initially it was big data, then it was analytics, then it was automation, then of course the AI, doing all of that for our corporate clients. So basically been going up and down. Now the lesson, coming back to your question, the lesson here to me is there's always a hype and a reality, right? So I think as
Mm,
marketing people, you want to create a momentum around more investment, more people, right? So more excitement around AI. That's fine. But at the same time, as researchers, as implementation people, as application people, as business people, you also need to be aware of the reality around this. So every time people say, this time it's different, right? So I'm somewhat more cautious with all my gray hair that, yes, this time it is different. Every time is different, right? So
yeah,
no single time is repeats itself. Every time is different, but it's a different set of issues, different kind of implications on society that we need to be aware of. So, yes, very optimistic about what AI can do, but also very cautious that we just don't take it too lightly and then start doing things and regret later, which we have as a society in certain areas, right? So maybe a more measured approach. So I call myself so cautiously optimistic, not
interesting.
irrational exuberance of what Gen AI, generative AI can do, but cautiously optimistic that yes, we are doing things and we are taking one step ahead at a time. Maybe it is a little bit faster now, but I would say that it is an exponential rise, and then we'll all be replaced by machines and so on, right? So that's some of the stuff that you read today.
Sure. And I guess the biggest challenge is when you are in that bubble or hype to actually distinguish between how much extrapolation can be done, right? So, for example, a lot of excitement right now is based on the scaling laws, which have worked well till now that you throw more data and more compute and the algorithms give you result. But in a lot of sense, there is a hypothesis that this will continue, and if it does, then obviously AGI is much closer, right? Uh, so personally, in scenarios like this, where there is no clear yes or no, but at the same time there is a lot of hype, a lot of excitement, how do you navigate? What are some of the principles, or what are some of the learnings which you used to navigate in a time like this?
Yeah, no, good question. So I would say to just sort of distinguish the hype from the reality. Again, researchers has been shown, right, but through various studies, we're very bad at estimating what will happen in the future, right? So we underestimate the current and overestimate the future. So I would say that as it relates to the hype and the reality, I tend to look at it sort of every time it's different. Let's look at the underlying principles that lead to the phenomenon. So let's just take this example. You just said exponentially rising um, scale, right? So both in terms of compute power and our data. Now, the question I would have uh, is it just the matter of sort of the compute power that is really limiting us, right? So now, yes, we still haven't reached the full power of the brain in terms of the number of connections and neurons. Now, does it really go to say that as soon as we reach that, we'll have human level intelligence? There is something more happening in the brain than just the neural connections, right? So we take these connections, form concepts out of it, reason with those concepts, and come out with things that are creative, right? As humans, right? So
Yeah.
now, have we demonstrated all of those aspects? I would say no, right? So we seem to be standing on just one of the legs, right? So which is the deep learning, and more importantly, data. So we seem to think that yes, the more data you feed, obviously the more better it is going to be. Now, just do a thought experiment. Just because we pick one individual, let's say he or she understands the entire internet, uh, would we then say that that person is the most intelligent person on the planet? And is able to do everything that every other intelligent person can do? I would say no, right? So
No.
just because you have all of that data doesn't mean that you'll be able to use that data in a way that we as humans use, right? So now that's one aspect of it. Not all data is important, but then we're also probably feeding the large language models of today with pretty much close to what is available out there, right? So yes, there's still a
Yeah.
contention around proprietary data. Assume that we get to whatever settlement in the intervening years, 3 5 years. If we have all of that data, and all of the knowledge, is that sufficient to get intelligence? Is intelligence just a matter of data and then reasoning with that data to come up with something? I don't think so, right? So, and this is where, of course, people in the good old fashioned AI or GoFi have obviously thought through what is common sense reasoning, what is representation, reasoning, planning, all of those areas. Now, of course, large language models are basically looking at it with the data perspective, but there are theories behind some of these things. And it's very interesting, having come back to academic world, when I come into the university, it looks like everyone wants to do anything and everything to do with deep learning. And there seems to be a dearth of people even understanding what happened before. Yes, you don't
Right.
want to go look at the history books on AI, but at the same time, if you're not aware of all the advances that AI has made over the years, you're still coming back to repeat the same things that someone else has got a good theory behind and a good 20, 30 years of research behind. That's why I see people seem to be overweighted. If you like, if you look at it as a portfolio, we seem to be overweighted on data leading to intelligence, as opposed to other mechanisms could also lead to intelligence. So we seem to be over indexed on data. And the other thing is compute power, right? So everyone will just show
Hmm.
you the Moore's law and the exponential increase and say, look, we are going to reach at this certain point, we're going to reach the size of the brain. Look, we have got all the data. And those seem to be the only things that people are worried about. So that's why I would be much more cautious. And just because we have all of those things doesn't mean that we'll have artificial general intelligence. And there's again another misnomer. People think that artificial general intelligence is a quest that has just started and people are talking about it. What
Yeah.
was called AI was, in fact, artificial general intelligence. It
General
was not
intelligence.
artificial narrow intelligence. I mean, later on,
Right.
they couldn't solve that problem, so they went into narrow intelligence, or someone called it narrow intelligence. But no one really, the true researchers didn't give up on general intelligence. So, in fact, the very first GPS is not the global positioning system; it was a general purpose problem solver, right? So you have
Right.
NCSU, right? So GPS was known for general purpose problem solving. So in that sense, I think we still have a long way to go, is my view. But definitely there are advances from an application, from an engineering point of view. So I really see AI uh, now branch off into sort of a two kind of a branches. So AI has been
Mhm.
primarily a scientific quest or a research quest. Now, yes, that is continuing with AI or AGI or whatever you want to call it, but there's also an engineering discipline, right? So it started
Right.
coming together in the 80s and 90s with a little bit of the spluttering, but now I think it's very much an AI engineering branch as well, right? So again, just like software engineering started maturing in the 90s, 80s, and 90s, you will see AI engineering and AI systems engineering management also maturing. So there's definitely a role for that, and the quest for general intelligence will still continue, I think, for at least a couple of decades.
Great, great. And you yourself, during this period have spent time in industry. You've also been part of various strategic discussions, boardroom discussions, and now you are back to academia, right? So first of all, what was your motivation to go back to academia? What triggered that call?
Yeah. No, the call was again. I've always been interested in teaching and education. So I'll borrow a word from Gita and from the Vedanta, right? So the Indian scriptures. It is Swadharma, right? So what is it that comes that you feel natural? And I somehow felt my swadharma was in teaching, no matter whether I was a consultant or a business person or so on. I always it came naturally to me to teach, and I enjoyed that. So that's why I thought, as I retired from PwC last year, and a couple of years before that, I started thinking through what should I be doing, and I felt that teaching, educating the next generation, the younger generation, being involved in startups, and also having done quite a bit on the corporate side, obviously in the large corporate. So I wanted to spend more time in the smaller startup seed side of AI generally, but also not just the commercial sector, but two other sectors. So the public sector. So again, early days I had worked for defense and some of the space agencies, which are all public sector, but to work in the public sector more from a regulation policy making side. And the second aspect that I had not done much work that I want to continue or start doing is in the not for profit sector or the development sector. So that's something that I was interested in, taking the value that AI brings today, but not just for the people with the money and the corporates, but to much larger set of organizations. Both in US, in India, and other places, right? So those were the couple of areas. So both my passion for teaching and also my willingness or wanting to do other things. And of course, research, I always have a set of research interests that are still lying dormant. Again, in a corporate world, only so much of research I could do. And going back to some of the early days. So now there's no pressure to actually publish anything for the sake of publishing. It's much more around, hey, what are the real issues here? What can we do to solve certain problems? So that's the reason why academic environment gives you that flexibility and freedom. And of course, Carnegie Mellon University is a great place, one of the birthplaces of AI. So I was fortunate enough to be accepted here. So
Sure. One of the hypotheses or one of the potential ways in which the domain could grow is people would need to probably spend time in industry, but also go to academia more frequently, right? And then to that extent, for example, Singapore government has introduced a new, initiative where they are incentivizing people after 40 to go spend time in academia and come back. If you have to project going forward, do you see this happening in future, or do you I mean, what are your thoughts? Do you see more people coming back to academia and then going back to industry kind of thing in future?
yeah, I think there are absolutely right. So I think one of the things that AI has highlighted, right? So is this continuous education, right? So learning, we all know learning in terms of reinforcement learning, right? So, or continuous learning that we have our systems do. So we require our systems to adapt to the world and continuously change, right? So to maintain the performance, if not better the performance, right? So if the machine learning model the performance falls below a certain threshold, right? So whether it's accuracy, specificity, whatever it is, it falls below the threshold, we don't like it, right? So we want it to get better, right? So we feed more data, we do the retraining, but that's not the same with humans. So why is that the case? So why? And if anything, what the AI has done and will continue to do to us is that essentially we need to be on the edge, right? So if AI is learning and learning fast, then we should be ahead of the AI in whatever it can do so that we can contribute value as humans, right? So, yes, it is taking away some of the drudgery, but then we need to be much more inventive. So, in that sense, I think we all need to be continuous learners. I know people have talked about right from the 80s, right? So, Peter Senge and others, learning organizations and systems thinking. I mean, those have all been talked about, but I see issues both on the corporate side as well as on the academic side, right? So let me try and explain the issues, right? So on the corporate side, yes, I think everyone is driven by the daily sales or monthly or quarterly performance and annual performance and so on, right? So everyone is going go, 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 and everything is sort of dictated by these times lines, which essentially leaves very little time for learning. And I mean that both for the businesses, technology organization, people organizations, everything, right? So everything is measured to the nth degree, and you're looking at efficiency, that there is little time left for the brain to be more creative and also to learn more, right? So it's all fine to say yes, we all want to be a learning organization, but how do you actually provide that? I think there needs to be ways in which people can take a big chunk of time. It may be a month, a couple of months, quote unquote, sabbatical, go off to a university, do something, or it need not even be a university. Go take yourself from the current domain, go into something else, do and come back. I think that will enrich the organization. So take specific times off, but at the same time, not everyone might be able to do that. But within your own time frame, whether it's a month or a year, allocate some time for exploration, right? So I look at this very much from a reinforcement learning perspective, but for humans, exploration versus exploitation, right?
Yeah.
So the exploitation gives you today's money, right? So
Yeah.
as an
Mm.
individual, it is I've got this degree, I've done this, or this is my experience. So how do I exploit it? Obviously, to get more money so that I can earn my living. Exploration is for tomorrow's money, right? So I've
Yeah.
got so many friends who have gone into one particular software tool and done that, but after 5 years, 10 years, that tool is no longer valid because the technology has moved on, and they were just exploiting it at that point. They were not exploring. So every individual needs to be thinking about, hey, what do I exploit given my existing background, and what do I explore for my future earnings, right? So again, bring it back all down to dollars, right? So your today's earnings versus your tomorrow's earnings. So one is exploitation, the other is exploration, right? So that's how I think companies should be thinking about it as well, and individuals within those companies should be thinking, right? So that's on one side. Now, I think being an university, I think the universities are also not making it that easy for companies to come in, right? So again, I know it's changing, but I think we need to have not just these full 4 year programs, 3 year, 4 year programs. Then, of course, you have the master's program. Then you have the executive education kind of a program. Those tend to be, again, at least a year long, maybe 2 years long, a year long. There are certificates courses. I think it needs to be even more dynamic,
Mm.
where people come in and out. There is a constant interaction with the university people from the corporate side. And also for the researchers, yes, there is always a group of people who are out there in terms of the coming up with the theory and the true research, but they also need to be much more tuned to what is it that the world needs, what kinds of graduates do we need to produce, what kinds of executives you need to produce. And that's not just the business schools that should be thinking about it, right? So the technology schools, the AI schools, right? So or any of the engineering science schools should be thinking, and I know there are AI coming into every curriculum. AI is almost becoming, I would say, like statistics, right? So statistics is the basic science, which whether you're in science or engineering or social studies, liberal arts, you need to have a basic level of statistics. AI is almost becoming like that. It's a tool that you should be able to use in any one of these. So how do you get some of these researchers also to work with the industry to understand what kinds of people are needed, so that we are also adapting from an education perspective, we are adapting to what the business wants, and there is not this divide, right? So and I think that divide, having just sort of jumped from one side to the other, I think that divide can be bridged even more, right? So that's why I think, to your point around that, I think the government should encourage. Again, not every country believes in their governments, so sometimes it's the individuals, the
Individual.
universities, uh, and the companies need to take the initiative to bridge that gap and have a free circulation of people, ideas, and talent across the two kind of groups.
Great. One of the things which we didn't touch upon yet is that you are also an investor in in companies based out of India, and you're also, I think, part of a venture fund called Golden Sparrow. Right. So, uh, can you tell us a bit about what it is? What's the core theme and hypothesis behind the fund? What kind of companies do you fund, and what do you look for?
Yeah. Now, again, once I retired, so I was sort of very keen. I was part of an early startup back in the '90s, so I always had the little bit of the startup mentality in me, right? So I joined Rishad Karimji. So he's the head of the founder of Golden Sparrow, and it's a very small fund. It's
Mhm.
a $8 million fund, very much early seed round, early seed kind of venture. So I'm one of the venture partners there. So we are looking very much at um, companies coming out of India or Indians from globally trying to expand into India and globally is the primary thesis. Very much around a couple of areas. One is AI, the other is software as a service, the other one is deep tech. So just a couple of areas. So we're basically looking for early ideas, right? So people, founders, small groups of founders looking for early seed money. And that's something that we just started last year and invested in a few companies, which are listed in the website on Golden Sparrow. But my interest there is essentially to look at AI companies. So obviously, there are a number of generative AI companies. The number of overall startups in India has grown tremendously over the past few years, and again, we are coming out to be the second, third largest kind of startup environment, right? So over the past couple of years, even more than that. So in that sense, very interested in looking at companies. I would say if you take AI, generative AI, again, there are companies that are trying to combine the good old fashioned AI with the new generative AI, to my point earlier, right? So, and then trying to push the boundary forward. There are also companies that are focusing much more around the picks and shovels kind of business, right? So no matter what happens, there are certain things that you need to do to get fine tuning better, to get some of the retrieval augmented generation, the notion of agents. So some infrastructure that is needed, either connected back to the hardware or somewhere where you're going into the core to expand for large enterprises. So we are investing in some of those companies or looking at some of those companies in pushing the boundary forward in AI.
And what are some of the trends which you see currently? And then, what are some of the, let's say, areas which you are very excited about and areas which you're cautious about?
Yeah. Yeah. So good question. So I would say a couple of things that are interesting to me. So the first one, the increasing trend that I'm seeing is that large language models or large multimodal models, to be more generic, um, they are essentially those multimodal models are going into other areas of reasoning, planning, representing various types of knowledge, which starts combining with the old world of AI, right? So again, there are knowledge graphs, right? So now the way I think about generative AI's contribution is, uh, I think, a couple of things. So to me, I have very simple equations. It is the embedding plus attention has been shown to provide or tend towards a greater intelligence, right? So the
Mhm.
two inherent concepts that Gen AI has brought out, or the transformer model has brought out, are these two, right? So now the embedding, of course, was initially the text embedding and the image embedding, but you can go much further in terms of your embedding to look at graph embeddings. And a lot of people have looked at graph embeddings. It can be transaction embedding. So any kind of an entity or a structure that you can think of, you can do an embedding, right? So I work in system dynamics, right? So system dynamic models. So stocks and flows can be embedded, right? So everything has an embedding. It's nothing but taking some structure and then turning that into ones and zeros so that you can learn with that structure. And then attention is more given the vast amount of that those embeddings or those structures, which one should I focus for what purpose, right? So those two together is leading to intelligence. So now when I say the two worlds coming together, I can see how this embedding plus attention can be directed towards reasoning, towards planning, towards optimization, right? So not necessarily to do everything in a generative sense, but to do things much more analytically and use generation. So now we have various companies actually looking at using large language models as a back end, so that you can search through a knowledge graph, but if you don't have the necessary concepts, you can go and search through an LLM and come back and verify that. Or you can use the other way around. You can have the large language model as a front end interface, have a conversational interface, but then convert that into some kind of a knowledge structure and representation that you can use. I think this is very critical, because what is happening is, if you want people to trust your machines, especially in critical areas like financial services or healthcare, you need a body of knowledge that humans can verify. Yes, the large language models are coming up and generating those, but you want human verified large representational structures like knowledge graphs, which sort of talk about diseases. That's why I think it's important for more some of the heavy industries, or industries where human knowledge is important, that we have verifiable intelligence. So that's one area I would say. The second area is, we have seen the trend of large language models getting smaller and smaller, right? So mini language models, small language models, mini, micro, and so on. Now we're getting to a stage where some of those things will start are already available on smaller devices, right? So when you go into the smaller devices, large language models, it's also combining with another passion of mine, which is agents, right? So LLM is sort of now coming up with LLM based agents. So you have multiple of those in different architectures, can talk to each other and so on. That to me is again an extension of what we used to do in agent based modeling long time back, right? So in the 80s 90s, and that's still been evolving. Now agents, I think we are almost coming to the what I call as agent 4.0. The first generation of agents was sort of simple agent based modeling to look at very simple behaviors. Then during the 2000s, it also became digital twins, where you could connect not only the digital with the physical, but then for the physical to the digital was the first era. The second era was, hey, you can the digital can also start influencing the physical, right? So that's how the digital twin came about.
Correct.
Um, and then now, of course, it is the LLM based agents. This is sort of the third era. Now, you combine all of them, you get a very powerful set of agents which can do reasoning of sensory information, perceptual information, of cognitive information at the edge, right? So that's the second trend that we are seeing. Two more trends, and I'll stop. So the third one, I think one of the key areas which I know research are spending more time, but not so much in the corporate world. I think corporate world is waking up, is especially when you come to large language models and generated information, you need some way of verifying and validating information, right? So model validation or Gen AI model validation would become very important, right? So once we get past the excitement of, oh, this artwork is beautiful or this writing is great, now we need measures. So how great is it? Is it better than your best person? Or is it better than the top 10% of your company? What way are you saying better? What criteria did you use? Again, interestingly, that goes back to all of the initial quest on AI, right? So what do we mean by creativity, right? So can you put a metric around creativity? Can you put a metric around curiosity that the people have? Can you measure curiosity of the AI, right? Um, so those metrics are being developed, right? So, and again, now it has become more imperative that when you say that, oh, the AI is generating this marketing material, we want to compare that marketing material for its creativity versus a human generated one for its creativity. And of course both are going to merge, and we want a metric for how creative is this human plus AI combination, as opposed to just my human or just my AI. I believe, truly believe, that both together, in fact, can be more creative, can be more intelligent, can actually solve more problems together than on individual basis. So I think, I know the press likes the human versus AI, but to me it is human with AI is the more interesting question and the problem to solve, and how we solve that. And the last but not least is the dimension of ethics, right? So just because we can do everything, should we actually do? And then
Do.
taking a pause and looking at things and saying, is this something I can do? But what impact does it have on society and on people? And then decide, is it worth doing, or worth doing in what way, right? So the notion of ethics, responsible AI, and embedding that within whatever the company does, whether you're a startup or whether you're a large organization building LLMs or large foundation models. I think this should be inherent in them, right? So those are the key trends, at least I see.
Great. And so the companies which you're investing in, the startups which you're investing in, are they more like horizontal, so they can be falling in any of these themes? So they are, let's say, enabling AI on the edge, or they are working on model validation, and they're applying themselves across domains, or you're let's say picking these in specific areas.
Yeah, at this stage, we are open to both, right? So there are companies that are much more horizontal,
Mhm.
solving a particular, more a functional area as opposed to a vertical area. But as a fund, we have also invested in very specific verticals, in the hardware side of things, in the chip manufacture, in fact, even in space technologies, right? So again,
Oh,
India, it's sort
interesting.
of very exciting,
Yeah.
what's happening in India. So we are basically looking, given it's the seed funding, we are looking at things which are, as I said, on the hardware side of things, on the space side of things, as well as horizontal AI related things. So, but again, very much seed funding is what we are looking at, both horizontal and vertical. Um,
Got it. And any areas where you see a lot of excitement in industry, but you don't think that they are the right investment? So let's say some community member from analytics with the comes and pitches an idea. What are some of the ideas which you would discard out of the gate at this
Yeah, so I wouldn't discard any idea outright.
stage?
Uh,
Okay.
but what I would definitely look at is whether they have looked at the social implications of their ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So again, there are a lot of companies sort of plotting the growth, especially in the AGI, and of course, you need to show a hockey stick curve on how your revenues are going up. But have you actually considered all the things that can go wrong, right? So, and how we are addressing those, right? So, I've always looked at opportunity. The other side of opportunity is risk. And then have you addressed both, right? So you cannot exploit the opportunity side of things if you are not aware of the risks of that not going according to plan, right? So if you plan for the risks, then I think your opportunity side is enhanced. So from an investment perspective, definitely look at uh, bring any idea, but have you considered the risks and how big are those risks and how do you mitigate those risks in addition to the opportunity side of it, is what I would say. Then the only other thing that I would refrain from doing, just as a core philosophy of mine, is automating things outright, right? So and again, depends on the situation, but many of the tasks I think still requires a human in the loop and a human supervision, and I really need to be totally convinced that this doesn't require any human. Of course, there are some areas like safety critical areas, bomb disposal, for example, right? So where it may be more dangerous for a human being to go there, but it's only maybe a few tens of thousands for a robot to go there and diffuse a bomb, right? So I can take that to be completely automated. But some of the other areas, I would be very careful in looking at if someone came and said, no, I'm going to automate the people away, not because of safety, security issues, but because it is cheaper to do. So that's when I would be much more skeptical on that investment.
Sure. One of the areas which you have mentioned a couple of times, and I would want to double click on is AI ethics, and also simultaneously kind of managing ROI with AI investments, right? Uh, do you see them, as trade-offs coming up in industry? So, or is it, there are two kind of independent considerations? How do you kind of think about these two things, and then is there a intersection overlap which you need
Yeah.
to think about?
Yeah, I think it will be good if both the I think there are multiple stakeholders involved here. If everyone looks at it much more as a trade-off that needs to be made and then goes into the what the trade-offs are. But I think we are, for whatever reason, we are getting into just like the human versus AI. So there's another thing that's
Right.
sort of popping up, which is accelerationists versus decelerationist, right? So, and again, I think these kinds of arguments are not very helpful. It's not that the responsible AI community was basically saying stop everything, right?
Right.
So, and the acceleration is now interpreting this as, hey, you're putting a stop to everything. Look at all these some of the other countries, what they could be doing and what they are doing, and we'll be left behind. So we need to no holds bar. We just need to accelerate because they just point to country A, country B doing things, right? So again, I think if we are in this cycle, I think it's going to end very badly for humanity in general, right? So whether it is country A or country B, it's going to end badly. Similarly, from the responsible AI side of things, I think, again, you need to somehow experiment socially, right? So this is where it gets tricky, right? So far, academic research is you do the work in the labs, but you don't do it unless it is really foolproof into the real world. But in AI, I think the closest parallel I see is in the medical domain, right? So take maybe 200, 250 years back. Obviously, there was no regulation, right? So if I thought that there was a better cure for your ill, I might say, hey, go take this potion, whatever it is, and it'll cure you. If it didn't cure, I'll say, oh, sorry, I thought it'll cure you, and it didn't cure, it made you worse. Doesn't matter. Just get along for a few more days, you'll be fine, right? So, or hey, I can see a lump on your hand. Oh, I can use this knife and cut it and remove it, right? So who cares what's there, right? So it'll all go off, right? And that's the way medicine was practiced. Again, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but at least a few hundred years back, right? So that's how it was practiced. Whereas now it is much more scientific as much as possible. It can still improve. So we do things on the digital side, then we have things on mice and other animals, then we take human trials, and then someone looks at it, looks at the results, approves it, and then it goes into full production, right? So yes, and it takes a long time, right? So it takes billions of dollars, and it takes 10 years plus to do that. I'm not suggesting that every AI should take 10 years to come out of the gate, but I think we need a process whereby if some tool is generated, yes, make it available to X number of people or whatever the number is, right? So again, it depends on the outcome and the impact that technology is going to have. Measure what is it that you want to measure, and then have some kind of a process by which that turns into a commercial product. As of now, I don't think there is any of that within the tech industry. And again, for whatever reasons, we have had safety standards. I mean, airlines have had safety standards that have evolved over time, right? So we believe that we can probably come up with something similar. So in that sense, I think there is a real need for starting from the safety aspect of it, but then moving more into we don't know what we don't know, right? So the some of the uses of this technology might bear fruit not immediately, but 5 years, 10 years down the line. How do you measure some of those social impact, right? So as it happens, right? So, and I know that has been some of the issues with the social networking side, right? So social media, social networking side, it has led to some bad consequences. So, do we want to repeat the same thing? So, that's why I think if people look at it as a trade off, as you mentioned, then there is a more rational argument as to what is it that you're trading off, right? So, against each other. And for this particular situation, what should be the right answer and or for what period of time? So, there's all, so so now coming to ethics, there are a number of ethical principles that people lay out, right? So now, uh, to me, all of them are trade off decisions. Now, uh, again, bias and fairness is shown to be an issue with AI. It's an issue with humans as well, right? So now, as the AIs are mimicking the humans, they are getting into the same territory that we have. Now, there are 30 plus definitions of fairness, right? So now there can be no AI that is fair across all of those 30 plus definitions. In fact, it is mathematically impossible. And these fairness definitions are mathematical formulas that I can show and say what
Yeah.
that fairness metric is. So in that sense, there are AI now. The If you want a certain level of accuracy, then you are likely to be unfair with respect to a specific community or a specific group. Now, if you want to make that fair across some specific metric, it costs money, and people don't like it when I say, hey, being fair costs money. Yes, it does cost money, and you can actually show the what dollars is required to be fairer than where society is. Then make a considered choice in terms of, hey, over what period of time should we become fairer, and how do we want to apportion that cost across the different stakeholders involved, right? So then it becomes a more transparent decision between just two of the metrics there around accuracy and fairness. Now, you have other complications, you have explainability, you have security, you have safety. All of those things that ethics talks about or responsible AI talks about are all trade-off decisions which need to be made in a in an individual decision making or an individual company. And that's where the responsible AI group is going, but it's essentially a trade off decision. And as long as we treat it as a trade off and different groups are involved in making that decision, I think we'll be making the right decision. Again, there are no structures as of now. Maybe the EU AI Act and others will enforce a certain discipline for organizations to follow. As of now, we don't have, right? So there's some standards bodies like the NIST standard body that is coming up with the frameworks to do that, but there is no mandate from government to do it, at least in US, right? So that's what's needed for us to push forward more, I think, responsibly with some of these innovations that we are talking about. There's a balance between the innovation, the social experimentation we are doing, and the adverse consequences that could have on equity. And the equity is not just in terms of wealth equity, it's also the knowledge inequity, right? So the healthy, wealthy, and wise, right? So the same, right? So it is education, it is finances, and it is health. All three go together, and that equity is what is being threatened.
And are there any recommendations? Let's say you are working with an organization which is facing these dilemmas, because this is now a multi-dimensional problem with no easy answer, and depending on the stakeholders, the actual problem, the actual answer could be very different. So let's say, as an organization there is a problem which is being solved with AI. What could be some of the best practices? How should they navigate this?
Yeah. So one of the primary things that I would say, so a couple of things, but the primary thing to me is what I've been calling trust management, right? So
Hmm.
what I mean by that is that we organizations do change management as a process, right? So whenever they have a large customer relationship management or a enterprise resource planning ERP kind of a software, they go through a long change process, right? So they go through the implementation, which might take a year or two, and they might do a change implementation or a change process, which takes a year or more. Now, we don't do anything similar with respect to AI, right? So again, the people are trained, so there's still a change management when you introduce AI, but I think it's much more than change management. What I mean by trust management is what are you doing to get your people who are using the system to trust the AI that you have just built, right? So it is the people trusting the AI. So number of people are involved in that. So it is obviously the developers of the AI need to be worried about the trust. The managers who are hoping to get some benefits and ROI need to worry about it. And of course, the users whose jobs may be threatened by this very AI need to trust the AI. Or you need to be very clear on, hey, this is not really going to be replacing your job. It's actually going to enhance your job. We expect you to do more. Um, with let's say handle more customers, but now we are giving you this aid or this assistant, right? So we're not taking away your job, we're actually enhancing it or expanding your job opportunities, right? So again, the situation may be very different, but you need to explain that. Now, it's not just explaining, the people also need to trust the AI, right? So is it giving the right results, right? So again, there are some very nuanced changes on AI. So we know that it's not always 100% accurate. There is a margin of error. And that margin of error cannot become zero. If it becomes zero, then you're overfitting the model to whatever
Yeah.
data you have. So you need to leave a little bit of slack for the system. So in that sense, what happens during that 3%, 4% error? Is it the human? Is there a human intervention, or are we going to suffer adverse consequences? What is the cost of those adverse consequences? So all of that need to be accounted for when you look at the trust management. So when does a human trust the AI? And it's also a process. It's not a point in time. Suddenly you install the AI doesn't mean that you should start trusting from today, right? So that's what you can declare, but you won't get the trust of the people. So it needs to be managed as a process to give the right information to the users and slowly take the user along with you, right? So the user of the system. So in that sense, I think trust management needs to be very much a core part of how organizations do. And it's a process. And then the other aspect of a trust management is the reverse side of it. It's not just how does the human trust the AI. The AI is continuously learning as well. So we need to tell the AI which human to trust. Again, people get very affected when I say which human to trust. Which
Right.
human to trust for what decision? You might be the
Yeah.
best marketing person, but you're hopeless at finance. Someone else might be the best finance person, but they're bad at marketing. So the AI
Right.
needs to know, hey, whom do I trust for marketing decisions? Whom do I trust for financial decisions? And that's not easy for the AI to know, right? So, and if the AI is learning as much as the human is learning, then both need to develop the trust in each other. And so that becomes trust managed becomes a critical area. The one more area that I would add is as organizations, I think we are really, really bad at creating what I call as decision logs, right? So we have all had transaction logs ever since the computers came about, right? So or even
Right.
before that, right? So I think when the Italians discovered or invented the double ledger bookkeeping system of credit and debit, right? So there have been transactions, right? So even maybe even before that, right? So there's transactions, and there have been transaction logs, but we don't have decision logs, right? So when humans make a decision, if the decision goes right, then it was me, it was my decision. Look how great I am. But if the decision goes wrong, you generally ignore it unless you're questioned upon it. Even if it's questioned, you'll say, oh, yeah, the market did not behave, the competition reacted differently, the consumers didn't really take the appeal. It's just that you didn't design the product that was appealing to the customer, but it was the blame goes on the customer, something amorphous outside, because we don't track our decisions. So the tracking the decision is not so much to find faults with humans. Now, it is critical. You asked about ROI. It is critical for the return on investment, because where is the return? So AI essentially is benchmarked against humans. So in humans, you measure the task and you say, hey, this takes 3 hours for me to do. Now the AI is doing it in 3 minutes. Great. So it went from 3 hours to 3 minutes. But that's not the only thing that AI does. The AI, we claim at least, that it makes better decisions. But how do you quantify those better decisions? Better decisions than humans. But oh, we don't have the human decision making and how effective we are for the AI to be compared against. And better decision making against which humans? Your entire organization, the 10% of the best people, your best underwriter in an insurance company, the AI is better than him or her? Or is it better than the last 1% or the last person who essentially labeled your data, machine learning data? Is it better than him or her? And usually it happens to be the last answer, because organizations don't spend the time with their experts. So we don't get the experts to look at the data and label it. We get whoever has got some time available to do it. They generally are not the experts who are busy generating revenue for the company, right? So if you want the AI actually to be helping the people and your top 10%, 20% of your people, then you better get the 10%, 20% of your people to opine on how the AI is being developed. Again, back to the trust. If it is at least as good or at least half as good as your top 10%, you're still going a long way in terms of getting the improvement in your ROI. But you need those people to come there. Currently, it's not happening. So the AI is left to the data scientists will build it. Oh, my people are very busy. I can't give you my best underwriter or best whoever to do the work for you, because they are generating revenue. But we really truly believe that AI is going to help us, that we need those people and we need to be measuring the decisions of what they do, what the AI does, and then comparing, right? So still a long way to go in what I call as the decision logs that need to be created by companies.
Great. Great. Just want to touch on a few areas where we couldn't spend as much time. One was, your involvement with, ISDM and the work with NGO which you are doing. So can you elaborate a bit on that and the impact which it is creating?
Yeah, so one of the other areas, as I said earlier, is how can we take the benefits of AI to a much larger group of people rather than just the corporate world or the people with money, right? So, again, very much involved with ISDM. So it is Indian Strategic Development Management Institute, based in Delhi. And the ethos of that group, with a few founders, has been very much around um, in India and elsewhere. people do great work in terms of not for profit, very localized, but it really doesn't scale. Doesn't scale because people don't have the leadership qualities and are probably not that interested in scaling it to the entire country, right? So you might have someone doing some great work in a particular district or even a particular village in Karnataka, but the problems and solutions that they're coming up is probably no different in Punjab or Kashmir, right? So, but there's no one to see that and adopt it over there, right? So now, what do you do to scale? And that's how a couple of people, Ravi and others, sort of set up this ISDM to do a leadership training for people from the not-for-profit center who actually come with the problems, go spend some time with the professors, go back to the field, do the work there. So the project work is essentially what impact that they have had in the local community. So that's what they have been doing. I think they've been going for almost 9 years plus, right? So now, over the past couple of years or the past year, they have set up both a knowledge institute and also a center for decision science for social impact. So I've been helping them essentially look at becoming, I call it the hugging face for the not for profit sector in India, right? So to be able to house all different kinds of data. Again, obviously in India as in elsewhere, the states have many of the programs and the data. Yes, the central government also has some data, but the more of the on the ground programs happen at the state level, and they're all very different. Each state obviously runs its own departments its own way. So can we start aggregating some of that data? Now, it's not just the data, but can we build models that others are working on, and also build visualizations so that it becomes a center very similar to the Hugging Face, a common good kind of a infrastructure where people can go get data. If they don't have data, maybe you can put in some of the data again on a very much a open source policy kind. And what the institute has been doing literally over the past couple of months has been sourcing a number of projects. More than around 70 organizations, not for profit organizations, came up with ideas. They were down selected to 15, and now they are down selected to 7 of them, which are going to be funded by the Center for Decision Science of Social Impact. And it ranges across multiple states, multiple issues. One using LLMs for the blind and making some of the data available to everyone. Some looking at migrant workers, doing the matching between the learning and the earning, right? So there are a number of those projects which are all going to be funded by this, to create a data set, to create some of the data scientists, then that would become more available, and to scale from maybe a couple of states where this is happening well to maybe all states where it is relevant, right? So essentially become a focal point or a facilitator site where people with problems can come, and people who can develop solutions can also go in. Because I see the enthusiasm in especially the younger generation wanting to contribute the time. It's not that everyone needs to give up their paying job and work for the development sector, but there are a lot of people who are saying, yeah, I've got a nice job, right? So I'm earning enough money, right? So with whatever startup or organization, but I'm happy to devote 8 hours a week, right? So 10 hours a week on something more socially relevant. So we want to tap into that group of people. So if you have the data and the problems coming from the social organizations and the people who have the time, who are willing to address those issues, then you have a good point where people with problems can be matched with people who have the time to develop the solutions, and there's a platform there to actually have those solutions developed. So that's the vision, I should say, for CDSSI and the Knowledge Institute.
And these problem submission and selection happens annually, or is it an ongoing thing? How does this
Yeah.
happen?
So it just happened for the first time. So we just
Okay.
got the process, and literally 2 days back, I think last weekend, there was a kickoff of the initial batch of organizations in Bangalore last Friday. Thursday or Friday, and I think it'll be an annual affair, right? So we will continue to fund these companies, but then also look for others over the next few years. Yeah, to create that community of both people with problems and people who can develop the solutions and bringing them together.
Great, great. And Anand, any particular books or areas interest which have had a huge impact on you, both as a, let's say, AI researcher, AI practitioner, or outside, right, strategic thinking? So what are some of the books or areas?
Yeah, so one of the books that was really an eye opener for me was Shoshana Zuboff's book on surveillance capitalism.
Mhm.
uh, that actually goes into some of the negative consequences of technology. I think there are sort of a lot of people who talk about the great things that happen. I think this was a very much a eye-opening book for me in terms of the way we need to balance both. So that's one book I would highly recommend. It's been a few years, I think, since she published that. Um, and uh, on a more, I guess, um, theoretical side or philosophical side, I would say the Book of Why by Judea Pearl, right? So that's a very interesting book. To me, the notion of causality and causal models is something very interesting. So always look for causal models. I'm a big believer in system dynamics. So John Sterman's book on business dynamics is a great book. And then the notion of looking at various levels of intelligence, which again, Judea Pearl talks about it in his Book of Why. And of course, he has a number of other books, but this one really lays out how intelligence and creativity goes, right? So we are still very much in that data world. We are not in that intervention, which is a sort of second step. And this third step is actually counterfactual, looking at what if questions. And to me, one of the reasons for joining the Carnegie Mellon University, the Heinz College of Information Systems and Public Policy is related to that public policy part of it, right? So you really need to look at intervention, policy interventions, and then see what are the adverse consequences and what kinds of interventions can prevent some of those. So that's all what if analysis, counterfactual reasoning. And of course, he talks about it, but I also use system dynamics agent based modeling to do that. And I think that's very much needed as we get into complex systems, as we talk about, right? So in the academic world, everything is a complex system now, right? So, and we have been progressing so fast that no one person, even within an organization, even within a small organization, can understand everything. It's a very complex set of interrelated parts, and how do you actually reason with that is where I think things are going. So in that sense, I really like that book on the Book of Why, and of course the theory behind that in terms of causal models.
Great, great. Just one last question. And so, let's say there is a 20, 21 year old getting into their career. AI is something which is of interest, so the person really enjoys reading, learning about it. How should they think about their career? How should they think about, let's say, the next 4, 5 decades when they would be in the workforce?
Yeah. No, good question. So often get asked that, right? So, and I think it's a very different world to when I started my career way back in 80s. Um, is very much. I think you need to be a continuous learner, right? So that was true every time, but now it is even more so. So one of the things that at least when I was in PwC, I looked for is what I call as the 4 C's. Again, consultants boil it down all to 4 C's.
Yeah,
C's, what is successes, and so on, right? So the 4 C's are, I think, the first two very much interrelated: creativity and curiosity. Now, I think in any job that you do, if it is a more mundane job, then yes, the AI is coming after you, right? So you really need to find ways of making your work better. And if it is something more challenging, more creative, then you need to exhibit that creativity, right? So, and for that you need that curiosity to really understand how is this happening. Not necessarily you have to get into the deep math of it, but some of them might, right? So, but having the curiosity, how is it really working, right? So, or even if you're a deep math person, to say, oh, this is a very complex formula, I understand it, but how do I make it simple, that a 8-year-old can understand, right? So in a elementary or middle school, right? So I think that creativity and curiosity should be there. So then coupled with that, I think it's very critical, especially for data scientists, AI people, to also be able to communicate what they are doing in terms of their research, in terms of their models, and so on. And sometimes we just tend to be in the programming world, in the Python world, or the symbolic world of math. You really need to step out and be able to communicate. The communication, I think, will naturally lead to collaboration. So that's the other fourth C. And I think in today's world, again, given the thing around the complex systems, you really need to be working with other people, to be able to have an impact, right? So yes, I'm not saying that single people cannot be very useful, right? So there is a lot to be done for single people, but more and more it's becoming all teamwork, right? So you can see even the progression of research papers. There are more and more papers with 10 plus number of people in a larger team. So I think collaboration is important, whether you're in the academic world or even in the business world. You often have various organizational silos. You really need to be able to work across different people to really get your thing across. So those are the four C's that I would think: creativity, curiosity, communication, and collaboration is what you should be thinking about being a continuous learner.
Great. Thanks a lot, Anand, for sharing those, insights, those thinking, and then the work which you've been doing on specifically, I think, ethical AI, the framework on explainability, very, very useful. So thanks a lot for taking this time out, and it was great talking to you.
Thanks for having me with you. Thank you very much.